In our village I had friends who spoke a lot of nonsense to me. But one day when my father was once again arrested, even the teacher couldn't restrain herself from humiliating me in front of the class.
Isaac and his family are very stupid. They believe in a Christian God. Isaac's father is a criminal, who is serving a well-deserved sentence in prison. He is an enemy of the state and has spread un-Chinese teachings, which have already done a lot of harm to our people.
Not until later did I discover the background to this hatred of Christians. One of the reasons for being against them was of course that communism rejected all belief in God. But it was also because Christianity had come to China with the brutal opium traders and European conquerors. The missionaries had come with sincere intentions and real love for the people, but they had used methods that the military and economic powers of Europe had established. So at the time it was considered that Christianity had robbed the Chinese of their history and culture. People would say, one more Christian means one less Chinese. This hatred had made life very difficult for the first missionaries, and it had continued down to the communist period. In fact, traces of it remain to this day. So the children soon took up the teacher's motto. They even beat me up and accused me of being an enemy of the state. I said nothing of this to my mother, because she already had enough to worry about and was so concerned about my father, from whom we had heard nothing for a long time. But when one day I announced that I didn't want to go to school anymore, she wouldn't let me be until I had given her the real reason. She cried a lot and held me for a long time. She was also worried by the thought that this persecution still awaited my sister, yelling. I had the impression that she was suffering more than I was. For this reason I summoned up my courage and returned defiantly to school. When I was about 9 I began to read the Bible myself. My father had received this Bible from an old preacher, who had wrapped it in oiled paper during the Cultural Revolution and buried it. It was a real treasure to my father and our family, but I found it very hard to read. In school we learned the new Chinese language with the simplified letter symbols, but this Bible had been written in the traditional characters. Luckily I had heard almost all the stories already, and knew many by heart. We Chinese set great store by learning the Bible off by heart. In times of persecution, no one can take this knowledge away from you. My father went to a lot of trouble to make sure that I learned much of it in this way. When he came back from his evangelism trips, or when he had been working in the fields during the day, I would always have to recite a chapter from the Bible. I had to slave away at the well-known verses, and now I was even getting homework. And if I was unable to recite the said verses, I would have to fast, which is what my father called it when, as punishment, I had to go without supper. That was a harsh punishment for a growing boy. We didn't have enough to eat to start with, and now this hardship on top. I began to hate the Bible, and no longer read it with enthusiasm. I didn't love my father very much either at that time. He was simply away too often. When he wasn't in custody, he was off on evangelism tours, and when he finally did come home, I was questioned on my prepared chapters. Today I know, of course, that this drastic form of Bible study did me good. My father has become a great and a good friend to me, and I'm grateful to him for my life and for everything that I have learned from the Bible. I often wonder at how little Western Christians actually know of Holy Scriptures. How can the Word form us and guide us if we don't know it? So, yes, I am grateful to my father for making me cram the Scriptures. In summer we had 3 months of holiday. That was the happiest time in the life of the village. When we were children we would set out to discover nature. Sometimes we destroyed it as well, I am sorry to say, but we didn't understand this at the time. When the sweet potatoes had been harvested, our parents sent us out into the fields to dig around. In this way we brought home treasures that the farmers had missed. Sometimes it amounted to half a sack of potatoes. But we also provided ourselves with other food, something I'm a bit ashamed of now. We made catapults out of forked branches and rubber bands, and shot at birds. The smaller birds were merely target practice. They died for no good reason. But the bigger ones were carried happily and proudly home, as they would enhance the family menu. Sometimes we would fasten iron spikes to bamboo sticks and go hunting frogs. Even these were a welcome change to our family's diet. My grandmother was particularly skilled at making a decent stew out of frog's legs and a tasty soup out of the rest of the frog. Once when we captured a big tortoise, the whole family had a real feast. When we went fishing, we village children used a specific technique. We stretched some foil over a bowl and cut a hole in the foil. We placed a few bits of bread in the bowl and submerged it in the river. Fish came during the night to nibble at the bread. To do this they had to swim through the hole in the foil, but they weren't able to get out again. In the morning we would run down to the river and gather in our harvest. But sometimes the entire bowl was missing. Either the current had carried it away or other children had stolen our fish trap. My mother was always annoyed when we lost yet another bowl, because they cost money and you had to go into town to get a new one. No way could you have called me a little saint. Naturally, I devised pranks and could be cheeky. The catapult was part of our standard equipment as boys. We carried our catapults all the time, including in school. You just never knew when something might pop up on the way to school that you could kill. I even played around with it in the schoolyard, and on one occasion killed a window pane. As I was a pastor's child, this might have been viewed as retaliation against the state-run school. My father had just been imprisoned again, so a new pastor had to come to sort it out with the school and the party leadership. And the pane had to be replaced as well, of course, but I was relieved that there were no worse consequences. The other boys had taught me how to whistle with my fingers and my mouth. I used this new skill with enthusiasm, and let loose a daring whistle one day during class. Everybody laughed, and the teacher wanted to know who had whistled. But I was too cowardly to admit it, and the others did not give me away. They were proud of their success at teaching me. So we boys were all frog marched out of the classroom and caned on our backside outside the door. I was pleased that the other boys put up with this in good humor and didn't pay me back for the caning. That would have meant 33 more blows, the number of boys in the class with me. Another time I was playing with matches at school. A match would be placed with its tip on a rough surface. The thumb of the left hand held it in place, and then you flick the match away with a finger. If it was done properly, the match would fly off, bursting into fire as it flew. On one occasion I managed to do it very well, but there was a problem with my aim. One of my burning matches flew straight at the neck of one of the girls, set her hair light and left her with a nasty burn. She has probably still got the scar. My guilty conscience pricked me severely for that. I was worried that people would now speak badly of us Christians.
Yes, those Christians set fire to girls and mutilate them. One day that pastor's children will set fire to the whole village. It's quite right that the father should already be in prison.
Thoughts like this ran through my head. But luckily the girl's family were among the faithful in the village, and I made my tearful apologies to them. I would also often give the girl little presents after this, a pen, a juicy orange, or a stick of candy, which I would really rather have eaten myself. She accepted everything without a word, or even so much as looking at me, and never said thank you. I must have hurt her feelings badly, quite apart from the burn itself. Whenever I think of that stupid prank now, I wish I could meet the young lady again and be reconciled with her. Our church community continued to meet in our house, or in other private homes. We had no community room of our own. When it wasn't safe to meet in the village, we would gather in the woods, or in a sort of bay on the riverbank, which wasn't easy to spot. It was amazing how the information got around about the meeting. The whole congregation was always there, even in the most secret of places. When the authorities started persecuting us more strictly again, we met now and again in the cemetery. Many of the new Christians found that a bit creepy, but the brothers and sisters in charge encouraged us and said,
The devil's demons and the evil spirits of the ancestors have no power anymore. Jesus is the victor, and he has risen from the dead. If a spirit should meet us while we're in the cemetery, it can only be one of the resurrected ones.
It was early in the year. My father was once again on the run. Our house was under constant surveillance, because the police wanted to seize my father at all costs. They were hoping that he would return home in disguise or at night. It clearly wasn't possible for the congregation to gather at our house, so we arranged to meet in the cemetery. But the police got word of this and planned to arrest us all. Five policemen were sent from the main district town to our village. When they heard that we were in the graveyard, they wouldn't go in. The officer in charge grew angry and wanted to force the other policemen to enter the cemetery and take us all into custody. But they were so afraid of the spirits that they wouldn't set foot in the place. They stood several meters away and moved not a step closer. Their leader raged so loudly that we could all hear him from inside the cemetery. Eventually the policemen got into such an argument that they turned on each other and started fighting. We could hear the noise from the graveyard and brought the service to a premature end. We slipped silently out of different parts of the cemetery into the night. Some of us, however, went over to the police to care for them, devising makeshift bandages for the injured ones. But every now and then we did have to deal with real demons and evil spirits, like those in the Bible. In our locality there were some people suffering from possession. They were people who had got locked into a fearful dependency because of superstition or occult practices. Many lived in the woods or in caves by the river. Strange objects were festooned around these caves and in their bamboo huts. Dolls made of rice straw and bark hung from the trees. We didn't really know what these possessed people got up to in secret. But sometimes people from the village would go out to them and take sick children or animals with them, so that they might be healed by magic spells. These magicians and sorcerers had an oppressive effect on me. They seldom came into the village, and I don't actually know what they lived on. We children were always afraid of these people, because when we did see them, they looked wild and unkempt. When they looked at us, it felt as if they were spearing us with their eyes. Every once in a while one of these sorcerers or ghost women would visit our prayer meeting, agitating the believers. But my grandmother would just walk bravely up to them and call out the name of Jesus over and over, for she was certain that these people were possessed by demons.
Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
Sometimes they would cry out when she did this, and even become violent. On one occasion 10 men of the congregation couldn't restrain one of the women, who struck out like a wild thing and actually bit some of the men so badly that they bled. We children were usually taken out of the room at this point, but we could still hear the shouting and the horrible curses of the demons. One day I was present at the driving out of a demon. We had just begun the prayer meeting and were singing some of our favorite gospel songs when a man suddenly entered the yard cursing, his eyes angry and piercing. It was summertime and we could gather freely in the open. As the man began to hit the faithful with a stick and knock some of the songbooks out of their hands, my grandmother approached him with great courage and said,
"You evil demon, I command you to hang yourself."
At that very moment the man rose from the floor and floated half a meter above the flagstones. He made all sorts of gesticulations, but couldn't move from the spot, and didn't hit anyone else with his stick. He kept on abusing and cursing, but the congregation now began to pray out loud for him, very loudly in fact. Some commanded the evil spirit, others praised God for his redeeming power and for the fact that Jesus was stronger than all demons. The man's movements grew steadily weaker, and it was clear that his peculiar suspended position was taking most of his strength. Then Nene asked,
"You evil spirit in this man, will you come out now and leave this man in peace?"
The man suddenly got his strength back and yelled and riffed. At this my grandmother called out,
"You demon from Satan, I command you to turn upside down."
As we all watched, the man revolved so that his head now hung down near the floor, still floating in the air. His movements now became quite ponderous, his cursing ceased, and all he could do was to wheeze out a few bad words. The congregation, who had by now all gathered around the man, prayed again. Shaken by the man hanging in the air and by the reality of the demons, they praised God loudly and kept on calling out the name of Jesus over the man. The tiny yard echoed with the calls of Jesus. I should think the whole village must have heard them. It must have gone on for about 2 hours. Darkness had fallen by this time, and I was very frightened by the man hanging in the air. Finally, my grandmother asked against whether the evil spirit would now like to come out of the man. At this the man let out such a terrible cry that we all shrank back in fear, and then he fell to the ground as if dead. Nene went up to him, shook him gently and asked whether he would accept Jesus into his life. He was free now and would need a new master, or the demon would come back. The man wept and could only stammer that he would gladly have Jesus in his life. He didn't want to be tormented by such a dreadful spirit ever again. My grandmother spoke a long prayer of deliverance over him, and he repeated every word haltingly, but clearly deeply moved. Now the whole gathering praised Jesus and his power, and at last the visitors made their way home, visibly shaken. I have known ever since then that demons are real, but I have also experienced the greater and stronger power of Jesus. Nene could have recounted other similar experiences, but she didn't like to, because she didn't want to acknowledge and draw attention to the power of demons. One day the police came to our house yet again. The policemen were looking for my father. They searched the whole house and spotted the many certificates that I had been awarded for achievements at school and in sport. These were all hanging neatly in line and filled almost one entire wall of our central room. One of the policemen examined them very closely and then said, "I can see that you are going to do great things for China."
Indeed,
Agreed Nene.
he's going to be a preacher of the gospel.
Nonplussed, and minus my father, the policeman drove away again.